Thanks, everybody, for coming, especially at the end of a long but very good day. My name is Brant Houston. I am at the University of Illinois. I've been involved with the global conference since the inception. We're overcoming technical problems and real-time interviews occurring in the aisles, but we'll try to stay focused. This is called The Futures of Investigative Journalism. To my right, Ying Chan from China, Chuck Lewis from the U.S., Giannina Segnini from Costa Rica, and Giles from the United Kingdom and Panorama. We're going to go ahead and jump into this quickly. We hope to leave a good amount of time for questions you may have. We will have, I'm sure we'll cover a wide range of subjects having to do with what the future is or futures. Just a few remarks to begin. It's a confusing time. We all heard Glenn Greenwald say it's also a corrupt time for journalism, but we have many business models. We have for-profit, non-profit, sole practitioners. We have different kinds of media that we're using. We have to be concerned with what device somebody might actually see our investigations on. We know that we want to collaborate more than ever. This network is an example of that we have stories that we want to do across the world, and we need to collaborate with each other, especially in a time of diminished resources and money. We also know that we can produce and publish work that will be stitched together later at different times. It can be asynchronous. And we also know most of our work doesn't seem to ever go away now. It used to be you could have something in a newspaper, it would be thrown away, and it would be hard for anyone to find it later. Now our work exists for all time on the web, in social media, or wherever else it might appear. So I'm going to go ahead and, with that sort of broad view, ask each of our panelists to take about 10 minutes or so to tell us what they see coming up in the next 5 to 10 years, what the challenges are, whether it's the medium, it's oppressive governments, it's trying to negotiate freedom of information laws in different cultures. Whatever comes to mind, we'll hear from 4 people who have been longtime practitioners at the top of their form. So without further ado, I'll start with Ying Chan.
Hello. You're talking about 5 to 10 years? We can't even think about next year or this year.
Start wherever you want.
Well, anyway, I don't have a crystal ball. This is a very challenging topic. The state of investigative journalism reflects the state of journalism as we know it. We know what has become cliche, which is all true. The industry has been disrupted. We're coping with ever-changing technology. We are still looking for the Holy Grail. What's the business model? There's no solution yet. But then at the same time, we're working on great stories. I mean, there's great stories waiting to be told, and we've seen all the good work here. I spent a long time in New York working as a journalist, and then I went out to Hong Kong 15 years ago and also doing work in China. And so I stay in touch. Now, for this year and also coming here, I think what's most sobering for me is to see that we have good stories, but there's no one paying for the story. It's sobering to think of the work of the ICIJ, one of the great stories this year. You have the stories on the offshore leaks, 112 reporters, 58 countries, working more than 15 months, generated hundreds of stories. So you would have thought that there will be people, whether it be foundations, whether it be rich individuals, who will run to them and give them. We have one Australian, 1.5 million. That's good. but that's not enough. And that makes you think, why there's not a global fund for journalism? Just like there's a global fund for AIDS, malaria, and all that. I made the point 5 years ago, or 5 to 6 years ago, and there's still no global fund in sight. Whereas we know that the media, even more so than before, is a powerful tool, medium for education, for getting the messages out, whether it be AIDS, whether it be public health, whether it be anti-tobacco. It underlies everything. All good causes needs the media. So where's that money? Where's that global fund? So we need to do more work, I guess, in preaching the gospel of the need for the media. Now, just a few reflections. I think we just have to keep experimenting. We have to keep think outside the box, think global, work on our strength, which is shown plenty here in this gathering. Build on the organizations that have been tested, build on the strength, and to leverage their strength to raise the weak, so that we will all rise in doing those good stories. Yes, collaborations. Also, since I spent a long time in Asia, I like to speak for the importance of Asia. If you look at the map of the global network, right? If you go to that map, you will see that with all the memberships in this network, Asia is very thin. Right? We have old established organizations like the PCIJ. We have new organizations like what's been created in Nepal, in Vietnam, but still it's very sparse. And investigative reporting is taking a serious retreat in China because of the crackdown. But there are so many important stories that need to be told, and you have stories here that needs the connection, needs to do the reporting on the ground in Asia. So I would like to see more work out from Asia, more collaborations from here. In terms of skills, in terms of the tools, the US and UK, Africa is way ahead of Asia. I always got jealous looking at all the programs, look at the training classes and the topic, right? But there's a lot of native knowledge, local knowledge and expertise in Asia. And that what we can bring to the table and contribute to this global investigation network and in the global development of stories. So I thought hard, about business models. There's a lot of experimentation in Asia, in China too. Actually, there are independent media developing, even in China. It's developing on the internet, on the web. We have no solutions yet, but then somehow I think we're in journalism because we have certain faith. It's almost like a religion. You believe that the truth will prevail ultimately. You believe the public needs good journalism. So the future is got to be somewhere that is bright, but how do we get from here to there? It will be very challenging. Meantime, we'll keep the faith.
I believe that someday there will be a full understanding of what Ying Chan has done in China the last several years. She is an international treasure, and what you have done in China, Ying, should be left undescribed for a while. But if you want to study investigative reporting in China, you would have to read the book that she made happen, etc. So it is very exciting what is happening in China, I think, and the rest of Asia. Anyway, I will try to be brief if that's possible. It's not a small subject. I think I'm going to take it literally, the future and the futures, plural, which is an interesting concept of plural to future. I like it. I think we have 86 or almost 100 nonprofits closing fast, nonprofit news organizations in the United States. When I started the Center for Public Integrity in 1989, it was the second in the U.S. and I think in the world. I think those numbers will keep going up. There's much to discuss here. For-profits, the private journalism community, financial elites will continue to get their news from private sources, Bloomberg and Reuters, Thomson Reuters, thousands of dollar subscriptions, and the rest of the public will listen to Rush Limbaugh. No, I'm just kidding. In the U.S., they will get news from other sources, including the web, but we will have a bifurcated media system where high-priced media will come with a very, very expensive paywall. And then the commercial media, the major media organizations, will still be around. They will adapt as they have shown they can recently. And you will have a new crop of owners, media owners, and you already are seeing it with Jeff Bezos for the Washington Post, and you'll probably see someone like a Bloomberg come in and enter the commercial public media world and actually possibly purchase the New York Times or some of the other publications. You'll have a new group of owners that will have some of those most respected, at least U.S. and other parts of the world, institutions will continue. The most interesting area, I think many of us would agree, and one of them is social media. The way that news is consumed by young people, which are a very, very important part of this conference, and have been great fun to see the hundreds of students for this particular global conference. Using search engines to consume news daily, not reading a newspaper page 1, page 2, means that news consumption has radically changed. And it also means that news is organized in a parochial, local way. The problems that face Brazil and face every country on earth are global problems. And news must continue to morph more into, frankly, larger picture, wider aperture lens news, and that's got to increasingly have a global sensibility. That's why the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists was created in 1997, part of the Center for Public Integrity, and it's also why you're going to see many more of these organizations flourish, I think. And I believe that the best journalism on planet Earth, through the lens of international security and surveillance-related issues, through the lens of the environment, including climate change, in the context of corruption, business and political corruption. Those issues transcend individual borders, and they need to be covered as such. And for the most part, generally speaking, they are not. And with the exception of many of the journalists at this conference, that is the exception, frankly. And I think it's got to change. And I wrote an article a few years ago proposing that we redefine how to organize journalism. I actually think it's not correctly organized. It's organized according to markets, not according to power and how it is abused, which is what interests me the most. I believe that the walls will come down with academia. The best and brightest minds in the world are actually functioning as journalists. They are investigating how many military bases are on planet Earth. That would not be a journalist. That would be a public anthropologist. There are folks tracking corruption who are political scientists. There are historians and economists tracking all kinds of trends that the public should know about, and they write books and blogs, and we don't call them journalists. I think there will be a whole new field of academic study called accountability studies and that thousands of people around the world will study that and learn how to hold those in power accountable, and we will have a whole different way of doing journalism. Instead of it contracting, it will expand vastly, and I think that is a thrilling concept. And you are already seeing the attempt right now with some nonprofits that have been created around the world, starting in one case in Australia, but keep watching this space. I think it's really thrilling. I think that it's a kind of bizarre concept that we live in a truly global world and we don't have a truly global program that does investigative reporting with video around the world. I am sure that someone's going to do this in the next 5 to 10 years, and it will probably be a webcast, not a broadcast. And it is inevitable. And if somebody doesn't do it pretty soon, I'm going to do it. And I'll stop there.
Okay, thanks. We're going to go to Tom and then back to...
Hello. Okay, I'm going to start by asking if anyone can hear me. Having sat where you're sitting not that long ago, I know that I'm almost impossible to hear. So it's actually quite hard hearing even up here. So that's pretty democratic anyway. So I'll try and speak as loudly as I can, because I know there's a lot of other sounds in the hall that you're straining to hear through. The first thing to say is actually, I've worked at the BBC now for, well, I don't know, 20 years. I'm currently the editor of its main flagship investigative television program, Panorama, which has been around since 1953. And I have to say that I know absolutely nothing. I am not a futurologist, I'm a journalist. But coming to this conference, I've been struck, first of all, by the fact that I'm virtually the only person here from the BBC, a not-for-profit, cultural organization dedicated to informing the world. And I feel as though I'm almost the only person here from the BBC. Paul Myers is here from our online section. And I have to say that I find that slightly humbling and slightly concerning, because while I've been here, while I've been worried about partnerships and where my next story is coming from, I'm meeting people who are fighting to exist. And in the end, if this has taught me anything, just being here just for a couple of days, first of all, I certainly hope to come back. Secondly, that we are all going to need each other. That sounds terribly pious, slightly over the top, but I don't think it is. I think in the end, the biggest challenge for investigative journalism, which I accept, is in many ways going through a golden age, which David Lee outlined at the opening session in this room. The session with Glenn Greenwald was pretty extraordinary, though I know he was slightly critical of my organization. Just to say, before I go any further, as someone who works in the BBC, I have no problem in expressing my admiration for what he has done and what he does. So we're not all uniform about that at the BBC. I come from a not-for-profit organization which is funded by the British licence fee payer. That means we're a combination of globally looking, but at the same time slightly parochial. But places like the BBC will be needed more than ever in terms of helping and training and doing partnerships with people who are trying to do amazing work and who are under threat. In a broad sense, I fear that even from my own perspective, where I have to fight for investigative budgets, investigative journalism costs money, and it's at a time when in developed markets, we were talking about markets, although my organization is not supposedly market-driven, and yet we still have to worry about where our funding comes from. In those markets, there is probably a lot of competing interest. We are competing. I make television programs. I'm currently competing with wider and wider platforms, from online, from social media, from a proliferation of channels, most of whom I can guarantee will not be doing investigative journalism. So I am fighting to be seen and heard through all of those things. But the challenges that we face, as has been so eloquently said, challenges are genuinely international. And that's where I think an organization like the BBC has an important role in reaching out to people like yourselves and the work that you're doing and in collaborating. We've started some of that. Certainly on my program, we've collaborated with the ICIJ on a number of issues. I try and collaborate as broadly as I can to take on a range of powerful interests, particularly organizations like FIFA, where I've worked with many freelance journalists and local journalists, particularly Andrew Jennings, who's been around the conference this week. But I think at the same time we have to work out how we can all compete with platforms that are, I agree, coming up with new and innovative ways of looking at the world, but at the same time are not particularly good at stopping and thinking and weighing things up and actually having the time and the money. So I think the future is a combination of how we reach out to charities, whether it's things like Global Witness or not-for-profit organizations like ProPublica in America. We had one in Britain called the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, which went slightly awry. I think it's now slightly recovered. But I think I would stress more than anything else the need for partnership and the need for people like me, I guess, to listen as much as we can to the ideas and the concerns that journalists from around the world bring to us. I feel an enormous sense of privilege coming to a place like this in terms of what I'm allowed to do and what security I enjoy. So I think in the next 5 years, if I'm able to look that far forward, I think we have to work very hard at helping each other. And particularly organizations like my own have to work very hard at helping smaller organizations that will find it harder to compete against other media and with resources that are being constantly constrained. Anyway, there you go.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm going to try to squeeze the future in 10 minutes. The point I want to make this afternoon, is that what we call the future is already the present for scientists and for the commercial people, the business intelligence, and many other fields. I'm going to introduce you to some characters that may be familiar for you. This guy, Raymond, is the editor-in-chief of a newspaper. And this is his profile. He's already working on the 2048 strategic plan. He's thinking about vision, mission, innovation. He's delegating all the technology decisions to the IT manager. Every night he's asking for a new interactive application because he has no idea on what it takes to build an interactive app. Then he hired a new community manager who tweets 70 tweets a day, and that's the only reason why he hired her. And he's spending lots of money on licensed software because he thinks that the more expensive is better. And this is Henry. Henry is the lone wolf. He's 60 years old and a legendary award-winning investigative journalist. He has published the biggest scandals in his country. He meets his confidential sources at underground cafeterias, never gives the credit to researchers or developers who help him, and he gets a new allergy every time he listens to the word algorithm. He always barks that technology is killing quality journalism, but the truth is that he's so afraid of technology. This is Sarah. She's sitting very next to Henry, and she's a passionate geek. She's 28 years old, and she's a very skilled programmer who wants to change the world. She's a member of the IT department and just proposed an investigation about the Congress budget, but her boss, the IT manager, is only worried about the company's CMS.
And by the way, Raymond and Henry they don't know that she exists. This is Pedro. Pedro is the creative web designer. Pedro is 35. He's an interactive designer, very passionate about data visualization. He organizes hackathons and visualizes Wikipedia data because the journalists at the newspaper never pay attention to his ideas. Raymond and Henry wouldn't recognize his face if they come across with him during the weekend in a shopping mall. And let's talk about Henry for the rest minutes because we already know that he's wrong, right? But not because the reason you think. This guy is wrong because he's so afraid. In his mind, the only path is turning into a programmer. And he knows that's already 68 and he cannot achieve that. So the question is, should a journalist turn into a developer? And the answer is no. We have two ways. One way is try to turn ourselves into developers or technicians. And the other way is building a real alliance with programmers, with designers, with scientists. And the clue to have this alliance is to build a real teamwork. I mean, the world when we were investigative journalists who own the story is over. I mean, we have to know and understand that that time is absolutely over. What we have to do today is work as a team along with scientists and developers. And all we need to do that is learn how to talk to them, how to communicate to them. And this is exactly what we did 4 years ago in La Nación. It was a crazy idea. No other paper in the world had built a team like the one we built. And now we are working together, 2 developers, 3 journalists, and an interactive designer. And what we do is basically, I mean, it was not easy, but I can go into details later in the ceremony. Basically, the company was always saying, and the IT manager was saying, how can a journalist be the boss of a developer? And the story was that, I mean, once we were there, after a long fight, what happened is that this is the way that the newsroom was looking at this poor guy, Rigoberto, the first developer we hired. He was really, really a weirdo. and this is the way he was looking at us. I mean, the fusion between programmers and journalists is really amazing. As you can see here, the journalist has passion, nose for news, narrative, and then the programmer, discipline, knowledge and tools, languages. And little by little, they start helping us to have more discipline, and then start to get a little bit of passion. And then we can adapt new tools, and they get a nose for news. And this is exactly what happened with us. This is our team. The 3 of us are in the back in the screen because we were not there. And yes, so just to finish, this is how we are gathering information. We are basically consolidating public data. We have more data consolidated than the government itself on anything you can imagine. So we are investigating out of interviewing this large amount of data sets. This is a story we recently did last year where we found that half of the ministers were not paying taxes, and we did it by creating a database and correlate and cross-referencing this database with the real value of the properties. Well, the minister at the end and his wife had to quit after this investigation. And now the future. What's next? This is a story that was published back in 1981, where it's in Spanish, but it says, in the future, the journalists will write in computers. So yes, we are now in the future. And what we call the future is the past for scientists. For instance, now we are these people are across the globe, investigative journalists. And we meet every 2 years in the Global Conference, and what happens in the rest of the time is that we are totally disconnected. This is how we should look. And the way to do that is building a secure platform to share data. So just imagine, how many of you have data sets in your hard drives or in the cloud? How many of you? Any kind of Excel file on people, companies? Okay, great. So if you have a data set of people who are getting subsidies from the government, and then suddenly you have a foreigner there, it's a Romanian, and there is a Romanian here who has a list of criminals, or that you have the fugitives, and if you have a secure platform and all of us upload this information, and automatically the system can send us an alert saying you have a record that matches what he has. So this is something we have to build immediately, because communication, as we know it, is not, I mean, we have technology to do that and to build that. Right now we're working in a couple of projects that I'm not going to mention about transportation. But basically, we're going to tell the government where they have to spend their money, because we are correlating the transportation system as it is now and a database of how people are, where people are going every day to work. So this is a friend of mine. He used to be the editor-in-chief of the paper. He's a computer engineer from MIT and also MBA, and he quit the paper to start a dairy. And what he's doing is that every cow has a sensor. Sensor that weighs how much it weighs, and so for every day during the day he has this big data information, and he knows when there is something wrong with a cow, because of he's analyzing in real time with his iPad everything. So the future is basically based on analyzing historic data and comparing this data with streaming data. In the future, we will have all data coming from streaming channels, and we could build things like this. Like we can have stream data on rain precipitations and erosion, and also about population density, and we can anticipate where the flows can be. I mean, this is going on right now. Scientists are doing this, but we're not communicating with them. So the only people dying here today is traditional media, not quality journalism. So don't allow yourself to get infected by media's diseases. Don't behave like these characters that I introduced.
So while Giannina packs up, I will throw in a couple of questions. If there are questions from the crowd, let me know. One thing, Ying, that I saw you present earlier in the conference was the kind of crowdsourcing and citizen reporting that's going on in China. Is that a part of your vision for the future? And how does that work with telling stories and narratives? And how do we pay for it? I'm sorry. Okay, thanks. So how do we, where did we leave a microphone? Can you get that? Okay, thanks. I'm asking Ying, earlier she, in the conference, she talked about crowdsourcing in China, citizens taking photo of corrupt officials and so forth. So I was asking how she sees that as a part of the future. How do you tell the stories out of that? And the questions on our mind all the time is how do we get people to pay for that?
China's situation is very unique. Unique in the sense that because the print media or broadcast media is so controlled, so the online media is especially robust because that is one area where people can express themselves. So that's why crowdsourcing has been very, very important. Because you have, 600 million internet users, and they're very active. Cell phones and smartphones are cheap. You have 1.1 billion sets of cell phones floating around, circulating. So crowdsourcing has brought down officials, and their examples and examples. I think that will continue in spite of the government crackdown that's going on now, because it's just the very difficult for government to catch up with technology. To continue to censor the access becomes so onerous and expensive. So it's like an arms race going on between citizens and to express, to report what's going on, and between the government effort to control. Now, in a way, it's cheap. It does not. The business model is already there because people are chipping in. Right? It's very low cost. So that kind of journalism is happening.
And do you think that people would possibly pay for a small amount for an application that would make them part of a network like that is more citizen-based?
Well, the payment, yes, actually there are independent online media is developing. For example, there's one journalist, right? He's sick of his working for an organization, and working.
Yeah, I think it's working.
And
yes.
he offered a training course in investigative journalism. He's selling that package online. They're actually buyers, right? So technologists allow these independent entrepreneurs, right, to operate. The cost is very low, and he can get enough money to cover his expenses.
Okay. I want to jump over to Tom, if we get there. The BBC has a sustainability model that's really licensing fees.
Yeah.
Is that the answer?
I don't know if it can be the answer for much longer, because obviously the license fee is from a television platform. Obviously at the moment people are taking more and more different platforms, so I don't actually know in the long run how sustainable that is and at what point the BBC, my oil corporation, has to jump into taking money from wider platforms. I'd like to thank my colleague for the left here for actually putting together something very inspiring, which I think it's absolutely relevant to the sort of work that we're trying to do and that we're trying to catch up with, and that we're constantly trying at the BBC and through other media to harness. My only concern is that in the end, part of the skills of investigation, data mining is one skill set. There is always still the crucial skill set of handling sources, of handling people and bringing people to you with information. We can find ways of finding information, of subverting through technology, power and government and corporations. But at the same time, as journalists, we still have to learn the skill always of getting people to trust us in the way that Glenn earlier was talking about his relationship with Edward Snowden. And I think that's a crucial skill set, aside from anything else that we shouldn't lose sight of. The other thing I would say from my televisual perspective is the amount of work that's happening at the moment online through, for example, channels like Vice, which are privately funded, very well funded. I've lost, hesitate to say lost, but some very good television reporters are currently going off and working directly through YouTube platforms at the moment, and doing some really interesting work that's really pushing the boundaries of what we do. I think the danger for us big old corporations, if you like, is making sure that we're as flexible and fast on our feet at finding the ways of reaching out to journalists with ideas, and also of harnessing technology like the data mining that we heard earlier. It's a lot of things to keep across, I have to say, but we're going to have to harness all of them. Like everyone else here, I still believe that there's a big future. There's a huge interest out there in the world about holding power to account. This country, you can feel it at the moment. And I've only been here about 48 hours, and I've heard loads of it. It's just making sure that we can hand out the resources. What the model is, the BBC, I don't know, but I guess it's my job to go back to London and start getting them to talk about it more than they've talked about it so far.
Giannina, I figured you'd probably have something to say on the data mining. Do you see a future of corporations, or do you see a future of independent people, journalists, and networks?
Actually, that's not the future, it's the present. We are actually starting a company to do this kind of services, to provide this kind of services to not just to media, but NGOs who have money, but they don't know how to start to analyze data. And so the idea of this is I just mentioned this because this could be another field in which we can work and expand our capacity and projection, not just to media. I mean, the thing is here, we have been so attached to the fact that we work for media organizations, and even if we create centers or independent, we somehow emulate the same thing. I think the startups give us a clue on where to go. We need small teams, multidisciplinary teams with ideas and solving problems and telling great stories and unfolding investigative stories. And I think that's the private sector is a perfect example to make it sustainable. And
Chuck, what are you thinking after you've heard the future? What did you pick up so far?
Well, I mean, we know that you said futures, plural, and everyone is going to try to embrace and utilize the technologies properly and to the fullest. And the technologies, of course, will change approximately every hour. Just kidding, but it seems like it sometimes. And the commercial realm will do it, and different companies will do it differently. I mean, some will be forward-thinking, and that's a leadership issue inside each of those organizations and how they deploy resources. And animation will increasingly be part of, and other beautiful graphics are going to be fun. The visualization of information is going to keep progressing. We are moving into a visual society where text is not going to be as valued in terms of consumers or in terms of conveying complex information. We're already seeing it now, but it's going to accelerate. There's also a lot of people who believe that advertisers will much more be interested in video for various reasons than they have been so far. Display ads on websites obviously have not worked very well. Advertising is anemic online, and it has not grown substantially. And so as we watch this evolve, you're going to see the reason video is inevitable partly is because the commercial realm wants to do video. They need video, and the media owners recognize they've got to start utilizing video. So there's a lot of really interesting forces at play here. But there's also, parallel to this, a civil society community around the world that's watching the failure of leadership and the failure of governance itself, addressing the most important problems of the 21st century. And they are understandably alarmed at the obtuse, aloof ignorance and whatever word you want to use by those in power. They are just basically kicking the can down the road again in the 21st century on most of the most important problems. And so at some point, you are going to have a need to address these problems in terms of accountability, and that someone has to be the media holding those powers that be accountable. And the only way to do it is to watch it like a hawk, every piece of it. And some of that is going to be less beneficial financially than other pieces of it. Most commercial media will not embark on a 2 or 3 or 4 year investigation, will not embrace more data than WikiLeaks and involve 115 reporters in 60 countries and their news organizations. That is atypical. And that kind of heavy lifting reporting is going to be, for several years, still supported by the philanthropic and, basically private citizens who believe if you don't have information, you don't have communities. If you don't have communities, you don't have a democracy, because the self-governance concept is suddenly non-existent. People don't know what's happening and they don't have the information, so it's self-perpetuating. So we have a civic crisis in most of the frankly, most of the major nation states on planet Earth.
Well,
And it's really rather serious.
A quick question. You know, it's almost we're not looking in the mirror up here. I think most of this panel has close ties to universities, and we haven't addressed what role whatever the new university might be has in this, has in the potential for investigative reporting, for expertise, for data, and I'm not sure we've really addressed that as a part of the future. I sit at a university now feeling very much like I'm in a newsroom in 1990, which is I know it's coming. I can see all sorts of change coming. I'm not sure anybody's quite responding to it, but we're sort of an interesting situation. A number of us are in the university. We're dealing with technology. We're dealing with change. What role does that have in the future, do you think? And anybody can grab
Well,
that.
yeah, and we have a dean of 2 journalism schools in China sitting here. Let me just say very quickly, look, during the political strife in Latin America in the 1970s and 80s to today, the universities are the bastion of ideas, and utilizing most mainframe computers in the United States were actually on university campuses before most companies had them in the U.S. I mean, the internet, the web was developed mostly at places like universities. So a lot of this intellectual heft that is needed, and not to mention the academic freedom and the intellectual freedom, is at those places. And I was saying earlier, a lot of accountability-minded social scientists and other academics are functioning now as journalists, but the journalism community doesn't acknowledge their presence or frankly, their expertise. Somehow that's going to get harnessed, and I think I have ideas about how to do it. I think it has enormous potential, but here's the funny part, not so funny part. Universities are notoriously badly managed, and they are the last of the dinosaurs when it comes to this century also, about how to adapt to change. Look at the MOOCs and all the things, the embrace of the web. Most universities are terrified of that because it threatens their economic model. And so stay tuned. Yes, there's expertise and great advantages to academia if they can get their act together. That second part of that is a serious problem.
I think for universities, I gave them maybe 5 years. It is indeed the last bastion of resistance against the disruptive forces of technology. But look at MOOCs, look at what's going on. And it has to change somehow. And meanwhile, but what's encouraging is that we're already seeing journalism schools forging partnerships with media organizations because of the sharing of resources, providing the know-how. So it's very mutually beneficial relationship. And then for teaching is tremendously challenging. How do you keep up with all these changes? I think what we do is that we need to still teaching what's permanent and what's changes. The permanence being the basic reporting and writing, the values of good journalism. And those don't change. Yeah, those are the permanent. Right. What changes are the platforms and everything that we're talking about here, the data, learning the computers, learning the geek language, those changes, and the platform of delivery changes. And so I think universities should play a very important role. And in addition, the university will also play a role in promoting universal media literacy in an age when everybody is a producer, everybody is a writer and a reporter. And I don't think that role has been recognized yet, just because of the conservative nature of universities.
Maybe back down to Tom, looking at it from the view outside the university, although BBC seems to be doing a lot of education. And then we'll finish up with Giannina, and then we'll see if we've got some questions.
Interesting hearing this. In a way, just to expand on the point, it's feeling like you're in a newsroom like it must have felt in the early 90s. You're sitting there and you're not quite sure what's coming, but you know there's lots and lots of different trends coming, and there's lots of things that as a journalist, especially myself as an editor, I have to be across. And I think in a way it's this tension between, and this is I guess where universities come in, the tension between what you might say universal values of journalism and quality control versus lots of individuals who are highly motivated, who have access to technology, can get you access to information, who you can't ignore. You have to work together with them, and it's how, in a way, we move as media organizations into commissioners, if you like. We're commissioning journalists around the world, or specialists or technologists to come and help, and how far we succeed in bringing them together in a way that doesn't in any way compromise the sort of values that we're supposed to adhere to. Or are those values even important? Because a lot of big organizations like the BBC are currently going through all sorts of ruptures because things go wrong journalistically, and I think that's the danger of reaching out all over the place. And there's going to be quite a lot of tension in investigative journalism between those things. There already is a little bit of tension developing between those who impatiently want to just get the information out and those who seek to in a way, control it and to be guardians of it. So the next 3 or 4 years, I think those sort of tensions are going to come to the fore. In many ways, that's exciting, and in many ways, that should produce some amazing work. But it also may mean that 1 or 2 things go even more awry. We shall see.
No, just I think the approach at universities is wrong because of what I mentioned before. We think that we have to learn all the tools, and we're so focused on the tools. It's not about the tools. People keep asking us, for instance, what software you use for this and what software you use for that, and they take notes. So it's not about the software. It's about the ideas. So you need to know what you know. You have to know what you want. That's the first thing. And second thing is you need to know and you have to learn how to communicate with those technicians. You don't have to do it yourself, everything. This is the approach we're trying to sell. It's a teamwork. And so the only thing you need, you don't use a microwave if you don't know it exists. It's the same thing. If you don't know you can scrape information from the web or have streaming data, you will never try to do it because you don't know it exists. So this has to be a part of an integral education, and I think universities have to start now because we are too late. And as I say, we journalists are always like 30 or 40 years late in the party. This party started, this that I mentioned is going on 30, 40 years ago. This is not rocket science. Scientists are doing this behavior anticipation and so on. And now we discover that we can do that. We are always late. I think we have to move faster.
Okay. Chuck had
just one quick point. We have been doing an experiment with the Washington Post, American University. I have run an investigative reporting workshop. There's 18 university-based reporting centers. And the Washington Post wanted to partner with us, and we jointly hired a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter, and we are sharing his salary, and he will work for 3 years on the investigative team of the Post, teach students inside the Post, and be an editor at my workshop. But the Post was equally interested in the other parts, the computer sciences, the business school with business models, and all the other things, and they want that relationship with the school, all of the parts of the school. So if we can drop these walls down and increase the integration, we may see some very peculiar hybrid forms taking place where it's a non-profit, for-profit partnerships where the public is served, and it's complex how that occurs, and it will be episodic based on case by case, but in many communities, that combination will bolster the reporting and the students will get hands-on experience. There's a lot of talk about teaching hospitals and all that about journalism. This is an example similar to that where you are embracing the technologies. All of these things are cutting edge. Every student in most schools in America learn convergence, and they do all the technologies when they leave, et cetera. And so that's not the problem right now. It is, I'm worried about this global problem.
I want to thank everybody for sticking with us and hearing through the fans. Thank you.